The Guardian's oath, the scent of death, hung in the air. But Beacon knew it was wrong. The German shepherd's muscles tensed beneath his thick coat as he stood at the edge of the military cemetery, raindrops glistening on his fur. His eyes never left the flag-draped casket at the center of the gathering. While humans could be fooled by what they saw, Beacon trusted what his nose told him. And right now, it was screaming that something was terribly wrong. His ears pricked forward, catching the muffled sobs of Elena Reynolds as she clutched a folded flag to her chest. Beside her stood Sophia, her daughter, shoulders trembling beneath her black coat. They were mourning Marcus Mac Reynolds, decorated war veteran, beloved husband, father, and Beacon's human. But Beacon knew the truth. The casket didn't smell like Mac. The German shepherd pawed at the wet grass, a whine building in his throat. Jackson Jax Bennett, Mac's closest friend from their time in service together, held Beacon's leash with a white-knuckled grip. The dog's behavior was unusual. Beacon had always been the model of discipline, trained to perfection during his years, working alongside Mac in military operations. Now, something had changed. As the honor guard prepared to lower the casket into the freshly dug grave, Beacon's restraint finally broke. A deep growl rumbled from his chest, rising to a series of sharp, desperate barks that sliced through the solemn ceremony. The mourners shifted uncomfortably, exchanging concerned glances as the dog lunged forward, nearly pulling Jax off his feet. "What's wrong with him?" Sophia whispered, her voice catching as she pressed a tissue to her lips. Beacon's barking intensified, his powerful body straining against the leash as he tried to reach the casket. He wasn't just upset, he was frantic, desperate, as if trying to tell them something of vital importance. His claws dug into the mud, carving deep grooves as he fought to get closer. The soldiers at attention looked to each other, unsure how to proceed as the dog continued his alarming display. Elena stared at Beacon, something shifting in her tear-streaked face. For weeks she had moved through grief like a sleepwalker, but now a spark of something else flickered in her eyes. "Open it," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through Beacon's barks. "Open the casket." The cemetery fell silent except for the patter of rain and Beacon's insistent barking. The chaplain looked at Elena with concern. "Mrs. Reynolds, I understand your grief, but—" "Open it," she repeated, a new strength hardening her voice. "Please." The funeral director stepped forward, confusion etched across his face. "Mrs. Reynolds, I assure you everything was handled with the utmost. If my husband's dog thinks something is wrong, then something is wrong." Elena's words weren't a request anymore. "Open the casket, now. Open the casket, now." After a moment of uncomfortable silence, the officer overseeing the ceremony gave a reluctant nod. The pallbearers exchanged uneasy glances before carefully lifting the flag and setting it aside. The casket's lid creaked as they raised it, the sound echoing through the cemetery like a warning. As the lid lifted, Beacon suddenly fell silent. His ears flattened against his head, hackles raised along his spine. The mourners held their breath as Jack stepped forward to look inside. His face, weathered by years of military service, drained of all color. The man inside the casket was not Marcus Reynolds. The cemetery erupted into chaos. Sophia stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. Elena stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief as she stared at the stranger lying in what should have been her husband's final resting place. "Who is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the murmurs rippling through the crowd. Jax leaned closer, examining the unfamiliar face. The man wore a military uniform similar to Mac's, but there were subtle differences. Wrong insignia, misplaced medals, and then as rain spattered onto the corpse's exposed wrists, everyone saw the unmistakable marks of restraint. This man had been bound before death. "This wasn't an accident," Jack said, his voice hard with the realization. He turned to the funeral director, Harold Blackwood, whose face had gone ashen. "Who prepared this body?" Blackwood shook his head in disbelief, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool rain. "I don't understand. We received the body through proper military channels. All the documentation was in order." "If this isn't Mac," Sophia said, her voice trembling as she looked at her mother, "then where is Dad?" Before anyone could respond, a strange sound emerged from the casket. A rasping breath. The mourners gasped collectively as the supposedly dead man's chest rose slightly. His eyelids fluttered. "He's alive," someone shouted. Jax immediately pressed his fingers to the man's neck, feeling for a pulse. Weak, but it's there. "Someone call an ambulance." As phones emerged from pockets, the man's eyes opened fully, wild, disoriented, filled with terror. His lips moved, trying to form words. Jax leaned closer, straining to hear. "They took him," the man whispered, his voice like sandpaper. "Project Shadow." A violent cough racked his body. Jax tried to steady him. The man's eyes locked with Jax's, a desperate intelligence burning behind the pain. Woods, cabin, North Ridge. His breathing became labored, each word a struggle. "They know. I failed. They'll move him." Elena pushed forward, kneeling beside the casket, despite the mud soaking through her black dress. "Who are you? Please, tell me about my husband. Undercover. Like Reynolds." Blood flecked his lips as he coughed again. "They found out. Both of us." The wail of distant sirens cut through the rain as the man's eyes began to lose focus. He grabbed Jax's sleeve with surprising strength. "Dog knows," he gasped. "Dog can find him." His hand fell away as unconsciousness claimed him. The paramedics arrived, pushing through the crowd of shocked mourners. As they worked to stabilize the mysterious man, Beacon began to pace, his nose working the air currents, catching something only he could detect. Then, without warning, the German shepherd lunged with enough force to break free from Jax's grip. He bolted toward the edge of the cemetery, stopping only to look back once. A clear command to follow. Jax didn't hesitate. "Elena, Sophia, come with me. The rest of you, make sure this man gets to the hospital and is protected." "I'll call the military police," the chaplain offered, already dialing. "No!" Jax's voice was sharp. "If what he said about Project Shadow is true, we don't know who to trust. Just keep him safe. Don't tell anyone who asks that he regained consciousness." Elena and Sophia hurried after Jax, who was already running to catch up with Beacon. The German shepherd had stopped at the cemetery's edge, where the manicured grounds gave way to a dense forest. His posture was alert, purposeful. He wasn't running away. He was leading then. "Do you really think Dad is out there?" Sophia asked, her voice small as she stared into the shadowy trees. Elena squared her shoulders, wiping rain from her face. "I don't know, but I trust Beacon." As if understanding her words, Beacon let out a single determined bark, then plunged into the forest. The humans followed, leaving behind the ordered rows of gravestones for the wild unknown, clinging to a desperate hope that somewhere in those woods, Mac Reynolds might still be alive. The forest closed around them like a living entity, branches reaching overhead to block what little sunlight penetrated the storm clouds. Beacon moved with purpose, his nose occasionally dropping to the ground before lifting to sample the air. His wet fur appeared almost black in the dim light, a shadowy guide leading them deeper into territory that grew more treacherous with each step. Jax moved with military precision, his eyes scanning continuously for threats or signs of human presence. Elena and Sophia followed closely, their funeral attire woefully inadequate for a trek through muddy woodland. No one spoke. The only sounds were their labored breathing, the squelch of feet in mud, and the occasional rustle as Beacon pushed through undergrowth. "Are we sure about this?" Sophia finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the patter of rain through leaves. "What if it's a trap?" "It might be," Jax admitted, his hand instinctively reaching for a sidearm he no longer carried. "But if there's any chance Mac is out here..." He didn't need to finish. They all understood the stakes. Beacon suddenly stopped, his body going rigid. A low growl vibrated in his chest as his ears swiveled forward, detecting something beyond human perception. Jax raised a hand, signaling the others to freeze. "What is it?" Elena mouthed silently. Beacon's hackles rose as he stared fixedly at a dense thicket about 30 yards ahead. Then, unexpectedly, his demeanor changed. His tail began to wag. Not the carefree swing of a happy dog, but the tense, restrained movement of recognition. "He knows someone," Jax murmured. Without warning, Beacon bolted toward the thicket, disappearing into the tangle of vegetation. The three humans rushed after him, pushing through thorny branches that tore at their clothes and skin. When they broke through to the other side, they found themselves in a small clearing. At its center stood a dilapidated hunting cabin, its windows boarded, its door secured with a heavy padlock. Beacon was scratching frantically at the door, whining with an urgency that left no doubt. "Mac's in there," Elena breathed, hope and fear colliding in her voice. Jax approached cautiously, scanning the perimeter. "This is too easy," he muttered. "If someone went to all this trouble to fake Mac's death, they wouldn't just leave him unguarded." As if confirming his suspicion, Beacon suddenly abandoned the door and turned toward the forest edge, his posture shifting from excitement to alert aggression. A deep, warning growl rumbled from his throat. "Someone's coming!" Jax hissed, pulling Elena and Sophia toward the cabin. "Hide!" They barely made it behind the structure when the sound of approaching footsteps reached their ears. Two men emerged from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing, dressed in unmarked tactical gear. Each carried a sidearm and moved with the practiced efficiency of military training. "Orders are to move the package tonight," one said, his voice low. "The burial didn't go as planned." "What about the dog?" the second man asked. Target was insistent it could track him. "Not our problem anymore. Once we deliver Reynolds to the new location, it's out of our hands." Jax felt Elena stiffen beside him, at the confirmation that Mac was indeed alive. He squeezed her arm in warning. They needed to remain silent. The men approached the cabin, one pulling out a key for the padlock. As he reached the door, Beacon made his move. The German shepherd launched from his hiding place, a blur of fur and teeth, catching the first man completely by surprise. His powerful jaws clamped around the man's gun arm, dragging him to the ground with a startled cry. Jax didn't waste the opportunity. He sprinted forward, tackling the second man before he could draw his weapon. They hit the muddy ground hard, wrestling for control. The man was trained, but Jax had the element of surprise, and something more important to fight for. Elena and Sophia rushed to the cabin door. The key had fallen in the scuffle, and Elena snatched it up with trembling fingers. The padlock clicked open, and they pushed into the dim interior. The cabin was Spartan, a single room with bare wooden walls. In the center, strapped to a chair, sat a haggard figure. His head hung forward, his once powerful frame now diminished by whatever ordeal he had endured. But even in this state, they recognized him immediately. "Mac!" Elena cried, rushing to her husband's side. His head lifted slowly, as if it took monumental effort. His face was bruised, his eyes unfocused. For a moment he seemed not to recognize them. Then clarity dawned. "Elena? Elena?" His voice was a hoarse whisper. "You can't be here. It's not safe." "We're getting you out," Sophia said, already working on the restraints binding his wrists. "Beacon found you." At the mention of the dog's name, something sparked in Mac's eyes. "Beacon," he repeated. "I knew he would." Outside, the sounds of struggle had ceased. Elena and Sophia froze, fearful of which combatant had prevailed. The cabin door creaked open, and Jax appeared, breathing heavily, a cut above his eye, dripping blood. "We need to move," he said urgently. "Now!" "The men?" Elena asked, subdued, but not for long. "Others will be coming." With Sophia's help, they freed Mac from his restraints. He tried to stand but stumbled, his legs too weak to support him. Jax immediately moved to his side, draping Mac's arm across his shoulders. "What did they do to you?" Sophia asked, tears streaming down her face. Mac shook his head weakly. Later. Too much to explain now. Beacon appeared at the doorway, blood on his muzzle, but otherwise unharmed. His eyes found Mac, and for a moment, man and dog simply stared at each other in mutual recognition. Then Beacon turned, facing the forest, his posture indicating they should follow. "He knows a way out," Mac said, a hint of pride breaking through his exhaustion. Together they left the cabin, Mac supported between Jax and Elena. Beacon led them away from the path the guards had used, instead taking them deeper into the woods, along a barely visible trail that wound between the densest parts of the forest. They had barely covered 100 yards when the sound of angry voices erupted behind them. Their escape had been discovered. "Move faster," Jax urged, though Mac was already struggling to keep up. Beacon suddenly veered off the trail, guiding them into an area where the underbrush grew so thick it seemed impassable. The dog slipped through a narrow opening, and the humans followed, finding themselves in what appeared to be a dried creek bed, its high banks providing cover. "How did he know this was here?" Sophia whispered. "He didn't," Mac managed between labored breaths. "He can smell water. Underground spring." He looked at his dog with undisguised admiration. "Smart boy." They followed the creek bed for nearly half a mile, the sounds of pursuit growing distant, then fading entirely. The rain had intensified, turning the dry creek into a slippery, muddy trough that made progress difficult, but would also wash away their scent trail. When Beacon finally led them up the bank and back onto more solid ground, they found themselves on the edge of a rural road. Jax helped Max settle against a tree trunk, then surveyed their surroundings. "We need transportation," he said. "And we need to get Mac medical attention." Elena knelt beside her husband, cradling his face in her hands. "Who were those men? Why did they fake your death?" Mac's eyes were clearer now, his strength slowly returning. "It's complicated," he said. "I stumbled onto something during my last mission. Something they didn't want found." "Project Shadow," Sophia said, remembering the dying man's words. Mac's gaze sharpened. "How do you know that name?" "The man in your casket," Jax explained. He regained consciousness briefly. A pained expression crossed Mac's face. "Johnson," he murmured. "He was undercover too. They discovered us both." He closed his eyes briefly. "Is he?" "Alive, last we saw," Jax assured him. "Paramedics were taking him to the hospital." "Then we don't have much time," Max said grimly. "Once they realize he talked to you, they'll come after all of us." Elena's grip on her husband tightened. "Who are they, Mac? Who would do this?" Before he could answer, Beacon's ears perked up. His head swiveled toward the road, where headlights had appeared around a distant curve. "Down!" Jax ordered, pulling everyone into the underbrush. Now, the vehicle, a dark SUV with government plates, slowed as it approached their position. Beacon pressed close to Mac, a barely audible growl in his throat. "It's them," Mac whispered. But as the SUV drew nearer, Jax's expression changed from alarm to recognition. "Wait," he said. "I know that driver." He stood, stepping onto the road despite Elena's frantic attempt to pull him back. The SUV braked hard, and the driver's window lowered to reveal a woman in a plain black suit, her expression severe. "Bennett," she acknowledged with a curt nod. I see you found him." "Commander Davis," Jax replied warily. "How did you know where to look?" "I've been tracking your phone since the funeral went sideways," she said. "Get in, all of you. We don't have much time." Max struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Elena. "Can we trust her?" he asked Jax. "She was our direct superior in intelligence," Jax replied. "If she wanted us dead, she wouldn't have come alone." Commander Davis's face remained impassive. "The people behind Project Shadow have infiltrated multiple agencies. Right now, I'm your only hope of getting Reynolds proper medical attention and protection." Her eyes flicked to Beacon, who maintained his wary stance. The dog, too. Max studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Beacon," he said quietly, "it's okay." The German shepherd relaxed slightly but remained vigilant as they helped Mac into the SUV. As they pulled away, Beacon positioned himself at Mac's feet, his eyes never leaving the road ahead, a guardian still on duty even after completing his most important mission. Commander Davis drove with practiced precision, taking back roads and changing direction frequently to ensure they weren't followed. In the rear of the SUV, Elena tended to Mac as best she could with the first aid kit Davis had provided, cleaning the worst of his cuts and checking for signs of serious injury. "We're going to a secure medical facility," Davis explained. "One that isn't on any official records." "How deep does this go?" Jax asked from the passenger seat, his voice tight with controlled anger. Davis's eyes remained fixed on the road. "Deeper than you can imagine." Project Shadow was designed to be untraceable, a black-budget operation with tentacles in multiple intelligence agencies. "What is it?" Sophia asked. "What could be worth faking my father's death and killing another agent?" "Biological warfare," Mac answered weakly. "New generation, targeted pathogens that can be programmed to attack specific genetic markers." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. "That's genocide in a test tube," Mac finished grimly. "Johnson and I were sent in separately to verify rumors. We didn't know about each other until they captured us both." "How did you discover it?" Davis asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "We didn't, not fully, but we found enough financial records to prove it exists." He winced as the SUV hit a pothole. "They were going to extract whatever we knew, then eliminate us." "Why the elaborate funeral?" Jax asked. "Why not just make you disappear?" "Appearances," Davis replied. "Reynolds is high profile enough that a disappearance would trigger investigations. A hero's funeral, on the other hand, closes the book cleanly." "Or it would have," Max said, his hand dropping to stroke Beacon's head, "if not for this guy." Beacon leaned into the touch, a soft whine escaping him as if he understood the compliment. "They underestimated the bond between handler and dog," Davis observed. "An oversight that's going to cost them dearly." The SUV turned onto an unmarked gravel road that wound through dense forest before eventually arriving at what appeared to be an abandoned research facility. Chain-link fence surrounded the perimeter, but Davis used a keycard to open an automated gate. "Welcome to Outpost 9, she said as they pulled up to the main building, one of the few facilities completely outside the Shadow network. Inside, a small team of medical professionals waited. They immediately transferred Mac to a gurney, wheeling him toward a treatment room. Beacon tried to follow, but was held back by an orderly. "The dog stays with me," Mac insisted, his voice stronger than it had been. "Sir, the treatment area needs to remain sterile," the doctor began. "The dog stays," Davis interrupted firmly. "He's earned it." With a reluctant nod, the doctor allowed Beacon to trot alongside the gurney. Elena followed close behind, her hand never leaving Max. As the medical team worked, Davis led Jax and Sophia to a secure conference room. Maps and surveillance photos covered one wall, many featuring the cabin where Mac had been held. "We've been tracking Shadow for months," Davis explained. Reynolds and Johnson were our best chance at getting concrete evidence. How many people are involved? Sophia asked, studying the photos. Dozens, maybe hundreds, Davis replied. Politicians, military officials, private contractors, the perfect shadow government. Jax paced the room, processing everything. What happens now? They know Mac is alive, that Johnson talked. They'll come after all of us. Yes, Davis agreed, which is why we're accelerating our timeline. The intel Johnson managed to pass along at the funeral was the final piece we needed. What did he say? Sophia asked. Woods, cabin, North Ridge, Jax quoted, but he also said they'll move him. How did you know Mac would still be there? A rare smile touched Davis's lips. We didn't, but we knew they'd leave a trail we could follow while they prepared for transport. The hunt for you three was just the distraction we needed to position our people. A junior officer entered the room, handing Davis a tablet. She scanned it quickly, her expression hardening. It's done, she announced. Our teams just raided 3 shadow facilities simultaneously. We have their research, their financial records, and most of their key personnel in custody. Sophia sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Just like that? It's over? Davis's face grew solemn. Not entirely. Some players will escape the net, but Project Shadow is finished. She placed the tablet on the table. Your father's sacrifice made this possible. He's alive, Jax pointed out. Yes, Davis acknowledged, thanks to the remarkable intuition of a German shepherd. In the medical ward, Mac lay on a hospital bed, an IV replenishing the fluids he'd lost during his ordeal. Elena sat beside him, her hand entwined with his, while Beacon maintained his vigil on the floor, alert despite his exhaustion. Mac's eyes followed Elena as she adjusted his blanket. I never thought I'd see you again, he admitted softly. When they told me about the funeral plans, Elena's fingers tightened around his. I would have known, she insisted. Even without Beacon's warning, I would have felt it if you were really gone. A tired smile crossed Mac's face. Maybe. But I'm grateful we didn't have to test that theory. His gaze drifted to Beacon. He never gave up. When they separated us, I thought. His voice caught. I told him to find you. I didn't know if he understood, but I had to try. He understood. Elena assured him, reaching down to stroke the dog's proud head. He knew something was wrong from the moment they brought that casket to the cemetery. The door opened, and Sophia entered with Jax and Commander Davis. Sophia immediately rushed to her father's side, careful of his injuries, as she embraced him. Davis says you'll need to remain in protective custody for a while, Jax informed him, until they're sure all shadow operatives are accounted for. Mac nodded, unsurprised. What about Johnson? Stable, Davis replied. He'll recover, though not as quickly as you. The toxin they used to simulate death took a heavier toll on his system. He saved my life, Mac said quietly. He convinced them he had more valuable intelligence so they'd focus on him instead of me. A respectful silence followed this revelation, broken only when Beacon suddenly raised his head, ears perked toward the door. A moment later, it swung open to reveal a doctor carrying a clipboard. Your dog's hearing is remarkable, the doctor commented, reviewing Mac's charts. His other senses too, apparently. The lab would love to study him. Not happening, Mac replied firmly. The doctor smiled. Just a thought. You're recovering well, Major Reynolds. Another day of observation and you should be cleared to transfer to a more comfortable facility. After the doctor left, Davis stepped forward. There will be debriefings, of course, and eventually a public explanation for your miraculous resurrection. Something like that, Davis confirmed. The truth would cause panic and warn any shadow operatives who escaped our net. Elena frowned. So we just pretend none of this happened? Go back to normal life? Not immediately, Davis cautioned. There will be a transition period, protected accommodations, limited public exposure. Her expression softened slightly. "But yes, eventually you get your life back." Sophia looked down at Beacon, who had finally allowed himself to relax, his eyes heavy with impending sleep. "What about him? Does he get a medal or something?" For the first time, Davis laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her severe features. "Not officially, but I think we can arrange something appropriate." As night fell over the facility, the Reynolds family remained together in the small medical room. Jax took his leave, promising to return in the morning. Davis retreated to continue overseeing the operation's aftermath. In the quiet that followed, Mac found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. "You know," he said to Alina as she prepared to spend the night in the chair beside his bed, "there's something almost poetic about it. The military trained Beacon to detect explosives, track enemies, protect his handler. But they never trained him for this, to know when something was fundamentally wrong, to recognize that the man in that casket wasn't me. That wasn't training," Elena said softly. "That was love." Mac's hand dropped to Beacon's head, gently stroking between his ears. The German shepherd sighed contentedly, his mission complete. His family restored. "Good boy, Beacon," Mac whispered. 1 year later, the mountain trail wound through pine forest, dappled sunlight breaking through the canopy to create patterns on the needle-covered ground. Mac moved with the careful pace of a man who had learned to appreciate each step, each breath. Beside him, Beacon trotted happily, occasionally darting ahead to investigate an interesting scent before returning to his human side. The past year had been one of healing and adjustment. After 3 months in protective custody, the Reynolds family had been allowed to return to a version of normal life. Project Shadow had been dismantled, its leaders facing justice in quiet, classified proceedings. Mac had been officially found alive after a supposed identification error, a story the public largely accepted without question. Physical recovery had come relatively quickly for Mac. The emotional healing took longer. Nightmares still occasionally disturbed his sleep, sending him jerking awake in a cold sweat. On those nights, Beacon was always there, pressing close, offering silent comfort until morning. Today marked exactly 1 year since the funeral that wasn't. Mac had suggested this hike, a private pilgrimage of gratitude. Elena and Sophia had understood his need for solitude, for time to process with only Beacon as company. At the summit, Mac found a flat rock overlooking the valley and sat, Beacon settling beside him. The view was spectacular, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, the vast expanse of sky above. A perfect place for reflection. "You saved more than just me, you know," Mac said to Beacon, who tilted his head at the sound of his voice. "You saved countless lives that would have been lost if Project Shadow had succeeded." Beacon's ears twitched, his intelligent eyes fixed on Mac's face, as if understanding every word. Mac smiled, reaching into his pack to retrieve a special item, a custom dog tag he'd had made, engraved with Beacon's name and the simple words, faith, loyalty, courage. He attached it to Beacon's collar alongside his official tags. "Your own Medal of Honor," Mac explained. "I know material things don't matter to you, but I needed to mark this somehow." The German shepherd pressed against Mac's side, a solid, warm presence that had been his constant since their first days together in training. They had faced combat zones, desert heat, and mountain cold. But nothing had tested their bond like the events of the past year. "I've been thinking about what makes you different," Mac continued, his hand absently stroking Beacon's fur. "The military chose you for your intelligence, your physical abilities. They trained you to follow commands, to perform specific tasks." He paused, watching an eagle soar overhead. "But they couldn't train what matters most. Your heart, your intuition, your unwavering loyalty." Beacon looked up at him, eyes bright with what Mac had come to recognize as love. Pure, uncomplicated, absolute. People think the bond between a handler and their dog is about training, about establishing dominance and obedience, Mac mused. They don't understand it's really about trust, mutual respect, a partnership that transcends words. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Man and dog sat in companionable silence, bearing witness to the day's end, a luxury neither had been certain they would share again. "I made you a promise when they first paired us," Mac said eventually. "I promised to always protect you, to never leave you behind." His voice caught slightly. "When they separated us, I thought I'd broken that promise. But you found a way to rewrite the ending, didn't you? You refused to let me go." Beacon placed a paw on Mac's knee, as if reassuring him that no such promise had been broken. The gesture, so human in its timing and intent, brought a smile to Mac's face. "I wonder sometimes what would have happened if you hadn't been there that day," he admitted. "If you hadn't recognized the deception, hadn't led them to me." He shook his head. "But that's not worth dwelling on. You were there. You always have been." Standing, Mac brushed pine needles from his pants and gathered his pack. Beacon rose immediately, alert and ready to continue their journey. "Elena's probably got dinner waiting," Mac said. "We should head back." As they began their descent, Mac realized that this mountain pilgrimage had given him something he hadn't expected. Not just closure, but a profound sense of perspective. He had faced death, deception, and darkness, yet emerged with a deeper appreciation for the simplest truths: the loyalty of a dog, the love of family, the precious gift of each new day. Beacon trotted ahead, then stopped to look back, checking that his human was following. In that moment, bathed in the golden light of sunset, the German Shepherd seemed to embody everything Mac had come to value most: unwavering faith, boundless courage, and a heart that knew no limits. "Come on, boy," Mac called. "Let's go home." Beacon barked once in happy agreement, and together they continued down the mountain, two companions bound by an oath deeper than words, an oath that had saved not just a life, but a family, a mission, and perhaps in some small way, the world itself. Our relationships with dogs teach us the most fundamental lessons about love and loyalty. In Beacon's story, we see reflected the extraordinary bonds that form between humans and canines, bonds that transcend language, that operate on an almost spiritual level of understanding. What makes these connections so powerful? Perhaps it's the purity of a dog's devotion, uncomplicated by the doubts and conditions that often characterize human relationships. A dog's love is complete, unwavering, and honest. They see us at our worst and love us still. They celebrate our joys and comfort our sorrows without judgment or expectation. Beacon's determination to find Mac wasn't just about training or instinct. It was about a promise between two souls. Dogs keep their promises, even when they've never been spoken aloud. They remain faithful, even when circumstances suggest all hope is lost. In this way, they become our teachers, showing us what loyalty truly means in its most profound form. The story also reminds us that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes not from human intelligence, but from trusting the instincts and emotions we share with our animal companions. When Elena chose to believe Beacon, to trust that his distress signaled something important, she demonstrated a truth often forgotten in our technology-driven world: that there are forms of knowing that transcend rational analysis. In our fast-paced lives, we often miss the subtle signals around us. Dogs, with their heightened senses and present-moment awareness, remind us to pay attention, to smell the air, to listen for approaching footsteps, to notice changes in those we love. They bring us back to our most essential selves, to the animal awareness that still lives within us. Mac's reflection on the mountain speaks to another vital truth. that the relationships we form with dogs help us understand ourselves better. Through Beacon's eyes, Mac saw himself not as a soldier, not as a victim, but as someone worthy of unconditional love and extraordinary sacrifice. This perspective helped heal not just his physical wounds, but the deeper, invisible injuries to his spirit. For many of us, our dogs become mirrors reflecting the best versions of ourselves. They respond to our kindness, our patience, our consistency, encouraging us to embody these qualities more fully. They forgive our failings instantly, teaching us that grace is always available, that reconciliation need not be complicated. Perhaps most importantly, dogs show us how to live in the moment. Despite all he had endured, Beacon could still find joy in a mountain hike, still take pleasure in the simple act of being alongside his human companion. This capacity for present moment joy, even after trauma, offers a powerful lesson in resilience. The bonds we form with dogs like Beacon speak to something universal in the human experience. Our need for connection that transcends words, for loyalty that defies logic, for love that persists beyond all reasonable expectation. These relationships remind us that we are never truly alone, that we are understood on a level deeper than language. In a world often divided by differences, the relationship between humans and dogs offers a template for connection across boundaries, a reminder that love, loyalty, and understanding can flourish even between species with vastly different perspectives and experiences. As you reflect on Beacon's story, perhaps consider the animals who have touched your own life. What have they taught you about loyalty, about courage, about unconditional love? How have they changed your understanding of what it means to be truly connected to another being? Thank you so much for taking the time to experience this story about Beacon and Mac. The bond between humans and dogs is truly something special that transcends ordinary understanding. And I hope this narrative captured a bit of that magic. Have you ever had a dog or other pet who seemed to understand you on a level deeper than words? Or perhaps a furry companion who was there for you during a difficult time? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more narratives celebrating the extraordinary connection between humans and animals, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world and helps us continue creating content that honors these remarkable relationships. Until next time, cherish the animals in your life. They remind us of what matters most.